It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. Just if you email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Our archives are free at Spreaker.com, and there's a chat room. There's an email notification when we put up new content. And if you go there and look for our guest today, Joan Renner, you can find our previous interview, the first with the latest. Angie Underwood, the Los Angeles Herald, and the sordid crimes of a city. But today we have her back to talk about her new book called Of Mobsters and Movie Stars, The Bloody Golden Age of Hollywood. You could find Joan Renner on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube under her old book, Deranged LA Crimes. And her website is derangedlacrimes.com. Plus, you can find her a bio at wildbluepress.com. Joan Renner, are you there?
I am here. Yes. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you so much for coming back. It's been way too long.
Way too long. I know. Where did the time go?
I know, and I can take our little conversation off the air and clip that together and make a show out of that one. We're going to have 3 shows.
Exactly. Yeah. I know, right? So we're sort of sitting in the green room having a chat.
Oh, yeah, delightful woman. Before we get into your new book of Mobsters and Movie Stars, the Bloody Golden Age of Hollywood, tell us about yourself. Who is Joan Renner?
Well, I'm an author. I'm a blogger. I'm a true crime expert. One of the things I think I'm really the most proud of, though, is my volunteer work I'm working with the LA County Sheriff's Department with their museum. I work as a historian, an archivist, just pretty much whatever they need. I was previously with LAPD's museum, but when their director left, so did I. And then I'm not sure how long it's been. It's probably between 8 and 10 years that I've been now with the LA County Sheriff's Department. And I love the work. I love the work. I've learned a lot about the history of Los Angeles crime, police procedure. It's just, for me, I can't imagine having a better time.
Yeah, I think we talked about the first time you were on, about the first with the latest Angie Underwood story. Remind us about this book, the first book. The first with the latest, Angie Underwood, the Los Angeles Herald, and the Sordid Crimes of the City.
Yeah, it's Aggie Underwood. And Aggie really inspired me. Aggie, I never got to meet her in person, sadly, but I am friends with one of her grandsons. I know him, Val Underwood. And she was an inspiration. Her backstory is really tough. She had a tough time. Her mother died when she was a small child. She and her sister were separated, sent to foster homes. She's just one of those stories, the old-fashioned pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of story. And she did, and she made a success of it. She just accidentally fell into becoming a reporter, a newspaper reporter. She took a temporary job, holiday season 1927, I think. And she took this job. A friend called her up and said, "Hey, I'm working at the Post, at the Los Angeles Record, and we need someone to work the switchboard over the holidays, and I know you know how because we work together for the phone company." And Aggie said, "Yeah, I'd love that because just so happens I really want a pair of silk stockings." I asked my husband, Harry, and he said, "Oh, Aggie, Agnes." She didn't call herself Aggie. She got that nickname later. He said, "Agnes, I'm really sorry. We just can't afford that." And Aggie said, "Well, I'm tired of getting my sister's hand-me-downs." So she took the job, just expecting it to go through the holiday season. And then one of the biggest cases in LA history to that time, 1927, broke. It's covered in my new book, actually, and it's a kidnapping and mutilation murder of a girl, a 12-year-old girl, Marion Parker, in Los Angeles. And the case broke at the end of 27, and Aggie was fascinated by all the activity in the newsroom when the case broke and they found the guy and they had him in custody. She said the newsroom just became alive. And she said she committed the unpardonable sin of standing over reporters and watching what they were writing. And the the city editor in the paper said, hey, I think his name was Rod Brink. He said, Agnes, if you're so interested in this story, why don't you sit down and take dictation? And she said at that moment, she realized she wanted to be a reporter. And boy, that just started her off on a whole career that would span decades.
You know, that's so funny. The part, because you told that story before on the show, and the part I remember is about the stockings. She wanted to buy stockings. She wanted stock, and that's the thing. I mean, her sister was a younger sister at that point. Her younger sister, they'd been reunited. Her younger sister came out to live with Aggie and her family, and so the younger sister had a job. And Aggie didn't. She was the stay-at-home mom right then. And so, you know, she just kept getting her sister's hand-me-down silk stockings, and she rebelled. She said, no, Mas, I want my own pair, and, you know, I'll get a job. Because that's what she told her husband. She said, well, if you won't buy them for me, then I'll just get a job and buy them myself. And it was an empty threat. She hadn't worked in a long time. She'd worked as a waitress. She didn't, you know, she didn't know what to do. And then this just came out of the blue, as things sometimes do. Yeah, that was a real big luxury back in those days.
Yes, it was.
So now the new book of Mobsters and Movie Stars, the Golden Age of Hollywood. Give us an idea. I know I want to talk about Fatty Arbuckle, okay, but tell us. Okay. But overall, like, what kind of big cases did you cover in that one?
I covered it. Actually, it runs the gamut from cases people probably will never have heard of before, which I think is always a good idea, and to people like Fatty Arbuckle, Clara Bow, the silent film star, Mae West. And there's a story that's particularly interesting, I think, that shows the power that the studios had not only in the city, but over their actors. They could dictate your life. You know, if you wanted to have a child, you had one if the studio said it was okay.
Wow.
You know, they had an enormous amount of power. And one story in the book is Girl 27, and it's about a young woman who was raped at an MGM event. And there was a documentary made about her life story. She's deceased now, and it's unbelievable the power that the studios wielded. And you see that with things like another case is Busby Berkeley, the famed choreographer.
Wait, let me stop you right there, because I have in my notes here when we were talking before.
Sure.
Studios and the teen girl party. Now, that story you're talking about, Girl 27, right?
Yes.
That's the one where the studio held a party, and they brought in hundreds of little teenage girls. Is that it?
Mostly. They were extras. These girls all wanted to be in the movies. I mean, who didn't? It was the Depression. You were looking for anything. And a lot of these girls are starstruck. And the girl in this story wanted to be, she wanted to be in the movies. But her name was Patricia Douglas. The thing is that, these girls got a call. They got a call what they thought they were going to do. They were put in costumes like cowgirl costumes and stuff. They thought they were going to a movie shoot. They weren't even told that they were going to a party that MGM was throwing for their salesmen from around the country. And there were a couple of hundred guys here. And when they got off the train, which, I mean, most of them got off the train drunk already.
Right. And
when they were, welcomed with open arms by the studio heads and, it's great to have you guys here and this is all for you. And it's nod, nod, wink, wink at the girls. And the message they're sending, the studio's sending, is pretty clear. These girls are here for you. And that's exactly what these idiots thought. And that's exactly what happened at this party. Patricia Douglas was the only person who came forward to say that she'd been raped, but witnesses at the party said a lot of the girls had been groped and otherwise mishandled, and a lot of them were teenagers. They were underage, and it was appalling. But the studio had such power that even though Patricia, who was a fighter, she went ahead and she brought this to the public, but she was just absolutely slaughtered.
And not only that, but they provided so much. The amount of alcohol, I think it was scotch, right?
Oh, everything. If you wanted anything, you had it. And it was just like many, many, many bottles, way more than this crowd could drink. But although they did try to drink it all up, because it was free liquor. So there you go. But I mean, the whole thing is just it's appalling.
Oh no, that's a horrific story. That's totally
absolutely
undertold.
It is undertold, and the thing is that kind of power, when you think about it, it was like the studios had their own private. They actually did. You and I were talking about this before we started. Was that there was MGM, for instance, had its own police force. Literally own police force. It was they had police powers, just like Los Angeles Police Department, just like LA County Sheriff's Department. Literally, they were the police for the studio. Now, wait a minute. When you have a police department that works privately, the opportunities for corruption just boggle the mind. And believe me, there was a lot of corruption.
Yeah, like Disney World, or Disneyland, they have powers of arrest. They have their own detention cells there on the property. It's just amazing.
Oh, it's absolutely amazing. And the thing is, like I said, they, a lot of the some of the actors, if they played the game, which was, a lot of times pretty distasteful, but they had no choice. If they played the game, they might do all right. But others of them, even if they played the game, they were still horribly misused. They became drug addicts, like Judy Garland later on. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of addiction. They had problems. And if you were in the studio's good graces, they'd go to the mat for you. Yeah. If you got yourself into trouble, they'd go to the mat for you. But if they thought that there was going to cause them more of a problem than you were worth, oh, brother, they cut you loose in a heartbeat.
Yeah, if you haven't heard this story about these girls being brought down for this big party of mobsters and movie stars, the bloody golden age of Hollywood, it's worth it just for that story alone, because that's a totally undertold story.
It is, and I consider her to be the godmother of the Me Too movement.
Mm-hmm. And she's the only one that came forward, right?
Yeah, she is. I mean, others started to. Some of the people at the beginning, even some of the actors, well-known actors. I think Wallace Beery might have been one at the time, came forward to support her. But then they quickly got the memo: drop this, or just kiss your career goodbye. What
about the story of Fatty Arbuckle?
I know you wanted to.
I know you
wanted to talk. Well, there's just nothing not. Roscoe Arbuckle was just such an interesting guy. His backstory is pretty rough too. His father deserted the family. He was the baby in the family. He lived with his mom after the other kids had, I think been gone for quite a while. He grew up in Orange County, California, which is where I'm living now. He grew up, and he was a chubby kid and a shy kid. And so when traveling actors and whatnot came through Santa Ana, I think is where he was, he would go and see them, and it was just like being transported. And you hear this from a lot of stars who had troubled lives, especially back in the day. They would lose themselves in the movies or, whatever. And it was just a way. And they thought, oh, that's just a magical place. I want to go there. And sure enough, Fatty Arbuckle was at one of these shows once, and there was a part in this particular show for a kid actor. And for some reason, the kid got sick, or it was a no-show, whatever. And they'd seen Fatty hanging around, so they put him on stage, and the light bulb, just that magic moment, just went on over his head. It's like, yes. And the first time he got laughs, oh, that was it. He found his calling, and and that's why it's so tragic that his story ends so badly and with so many misconceptions about who he really was.
Well, what happened then? What were the allegations, and then what really happened?
Okay, the allegations were that he was with some friends. It was kind of like a boys' weekend, and it was over Labor Day and in 20-something. Sometimes I forget dates, but a couple of his friends went up. He had this car. He had this amazing car. It was like the Fatty Mobile. People everywhere recognized it. And he and a couple of friends of his drove up to San Francisco kind of to take a break. He'd been making film after film after film after film, and it's tiring. And so they went up to San Francisco for the holiday. and he's in San Francisco. And there was a young actress, and also she designed clothing. A lot of this stuff isn't known about her. She was treated badly too. The victim in this case, well, they're both victims really. Virginia Rapet. Virginia Rapet was an actress. She was a clothing designer. She was a beautiful young woman, and she heard about the party Fatty was having up in his suite at the hotel, and people heard she was in town. She got invited. She told her friend, she said, "Look, I'll go over there. If it's a stiff, I'll leave. But if it's really going, I might be able to make some Hollywood connections there, and then I'll tell you guys, and you can come over." And so she goes to the party, and this is where I think the myth begins. She gets to the party. She's drinking, I think, gin blossoms, I think is what the drink was called. It was basically gin and orange juice. She liked that particular cocktail, and so did Fatty Arbuckle. They're drinking, they're talking. Fatty Arbuckle was a very entertaining guy, and so they're chatting, and then at some point they go into a room together. And this is where it gets fuzzy. They go into a room together, and at some point, something happens, and she becomes violently ill. No one knew what was going on. They're all drinking alcohol. No one wants to be busted because it's prohibition. They don't want to have their names in the newspaper for drinking alcohol. So they're trying to take care of her in the hotel room. Still, no one knows what's going on with her. There were stories that she was kind of tortured, that they put ice on her genitalia to bring her around. This was an old wives' kind of remedy for what they thought might be ailing her. They didn't know. They're trying to attend to her themselves in this hotel room. And once they didn't take her, all the things they shoulda, woulda, coulda, they didn't do. And it's all because it was butt covering. They're saving their reputations, and that would probably happen pretty much the same way today. But the end result is that Virginia Rapet dies, and Fatty Arbuckle is accused of killing her. And the way it's supposed to have happened is he's supposed to have sexually assaulted her, and because he was such a big man, he supposedly crushed her to death under his girth. And that was the story that went around. And he was actually tried for her death, for her murder. And the studio, once they saw the way things were going, because there's two big scandals that sort of happen simultaneously. One is Fatty Arbuckle. The other one is the still unsolved murder of a director in Hollywood. So they have the studios are doing cleanup. So they're starting to separate themselves from Fatty Arbuckle. He goes to trial for Virginia Rapet's murder. He goes to trial 3 times. 3 mistrials in the first 2 cases, and in the last case, the jury found him not guilty, and they even issued a public apology. They said, "Look, we know you're not guilty. You had nothing to, you didn't kill this young woman. You're owed an apology. This is dreadful what's happened to you." But it was just too late. The public perception was already that he was a degenerate, and people had boycotted his films. He wasn't allowed to make any films. He found out who his friends were.
Yeah, look at me, 100 years later, and I still thought he was guilty. I thought, they covered it up or something. I thought,
no. What they did was they just fed him to the sharks, and it's really sad because he did find out who his friends were. Buster Keaton, the famed comedian, a lot of times gave Fatty work, and sometimes Fatty worked under the pseudonym William B. Good, like Will Be Good, or something like that. And so he did write some scenarios for some of Buster Keaton's films and everything, but his career was basically over. And the rumors that went around were that everybody, I think even to this day, people have heard the rumors that he assaulted her with a Coke bottle, that there was all these awful, atrocious things that happened. What probably happened, and again, there's no eyewitnesses. The only two people who know for sure were Virginia Rapé and Arbuckle. And what we can surmise from what we found out over the years is that they probably had some sort of consensual fooling around, whether it was intercourse or not, that I don't know. But there was probably something consensual going on. But she was somehow that it became this whole big thing. I think there was a lot of anti-Hollywood sentiment going around at the time anyway. The stars were living big, and their lives looked really good in the movie magazines. Mm. But, a lot of people were resentful of it. And I think that, Fatty just got caught up in this whole thing around Hollywood, and he was kind of the Judas goat. They just heaped everything on him, drove him out into the desert to die, and that was the end of it. But it wasn't the end of their problems. But it brought about the movies doing the self-censorship thing and all that. But for Arbuckle, he spent several years really just on the outside, just with the friends that he did have. And at the end of it all, it looked like he was going to get a chance at public redemption. There were some people who wrote articles saying, isn't this enough? He hasn't been, he's been scapegoated. This is ridiculous. And finally, it looks like he's going to get back in front of the fans, which he always wanted to do. And he's at dinner with some friends. He either was just about to make or he had made a deal to star in a couple of films under his own name on the screen once again. And so he's having dinner with some friends. He's celebrating. He's in a really upbeat mood because this is all he ever wanted. This was his dream. This is all he ever wanted. And so he says, this is the best night of my life.
Oh no, I'm afraid to hear the rest of this. Go ahead.
Well, you've seen enough movies, read enough books. You know what happens.
I hear the way you're building it up.
When you say this is the best night of my life, of course he dies later that night in his bed, I think, and that's the end. He never got his chance at public redemption in the way that he wanted, and it's a tragedy. And for Virginia Rapé, she was characterized as loose, a prostitute, this and that, because she was a forward-thinking young woman, and she was. I think that was kind of enough in a way. Yeah. She was a strong personality, and she was dead. Who better to be maligned than someone dead? And so she got dragged through the mill too. So it was awful all the way around. Both of their reputations were ruined. They continue to be ruined when people look up the stories, and it's just no, that's not what happened. So Roscoe Arbuckle, wherever you are, we know better.
Talking to Joan Renner about her book of mobsters and movie stars, The Bloody Golden Age of Hollywood. So the book is called Of Mobsters. We haven't mentioned one mobster yet. Which mobsters are we talking about during this period of time between 1919 and 1939?
Yeah, well, actually, there were we didn't have the mob in the same way in Los Angeles that people in New York. When you think mobsters, you usually think New York, Chicago, like Al Capone, and people in Detroit. I think it was the Purple Gang in Detroit. Cleveland had gangs. In Los Angeles, the paradigm was different. It was from the top down. Corruption began in City Hall. And it just sort of emanated, its tentacles just kind of went out all around. And so the mobsters didn't call the shots. The politicians did. They were in league with some bad people, for sure. but the politicians called the shots. And I would say, it's my personal opinion, so that's what, take it for what that's worth. My personal opinion is that the studios called the shots for the politicians. They were big donations, they were big donors to some of the political campaigns and stuff. So we had this whole interesting structure that didn't exist in other cities. So, but we did have mobsters, and we did have guys that came out from, there was sort of actually an annual, and it was covered in the news. There was like an annual migration. When it got cold and snowy in the east, gangsters came west because they were snowbirds. They came out here for the weather. They'd pull a few jobs, and then they'd go back to Chicago, Cleveland, wherever they were from. And it's amazing. So the mobsters in this tale, really, in these stories, I'd say, let's see, who would be a good one to talk about?
I guess the moguls were the mobsters, right?
They actually were.
Right.
I mean, and that, again, that's in my opinion, but
well, they call it the industry. It's still an industry town. These guys have a lot of power.
Yeah. It so is. But we had people like like Tony Carnero, and all of the criminals. It seems like, and I think for pretty obvious reasons, I think that crime in L.A. has sort of a cinematic flair that you don't see in crimes. Every place has sort of the crimes that characterize the area. Like their hashtag Florida man is, I mean, come on. You already have in your head, right? You're laughing. You already have in your head what that means. And LA is its own brand. And so I think a lot of it is really cinematic. And one of the guys I really like is Tony the Hat Carnero. Tony Carnero was a bootlegger. He was one of those guys that saw the opportunity in Prohibition. A lot of guys that were just low-level thugs or very much on the fringes made their fortunes during Prohibition because they started because people have a misunderstanding of Prohibition too. It was not illegal to drink. It was illegal to transport or manufacture liquor. And in some cases, manufacture was okay if you were making sacramental wine for churches, or if, or you could, as a private citizen, make actually what I think was kind of an enormous amount. Was it something like 200 gallons? I can't recall, but it was ridiculous. As a private citizen, you could make enough for your private consumption, but the transportation of it and the sales of it was illegal. So Prohibition was this sort of like, it was doomed to fail from the very beginning because they couldn't quite figure out what to do about it. And Tony Carnero is just one of those guys, and there were hundreds who actually made his fortune in that way. And Tony was always kind of thinking ahead. And one of the things that he did, because this is, during Prohibition, you could go to a speakeasy. There were speakeasies and stuff. And but he had this idea, and he wasn't alone, to refurbish an old barge and take it out just at what was then I think the 3-mile limit, and water taxi people out to this refurbished barge where they could not only drink, they could gamble. It was a win. It was a win-win. People lined up for these water taxis in Santa Monica and other places to get out to these gambling ships like crazy. It was like he was minting money. And when finally they, California politicians they're apoplectic that he and others are getting away with this. And it's like they're flaunting the law. Well, of course they are, and they're flaunting the law, and so were others who were involved in the same business. But it was average citizens who really, were supporting it. They were the ones who were taking those water taxis or, and so Tony Carnero had this. He had the Rex, which was kind of a luxury gambling and drinking barge. And so once California politicians get it together and they decide this is it, we're tired of them just thumbing their nose at the law, they decide that they're gonna they sort of redraw the boundaries so that it makes the 3-mile limit impossible. And in order for Tony Carnero to have accommodated it, he would have had to have been more like 7 miles out to sea or 10 miles. It was not going to profit. It was not going to work. And so so they decide, okay, there's going to be this bus. They figure out this whole bus with local law enforcement, state law enforcement entities. They're gonna bust Tony Carnero on his gambling ship and just show the world this is not going to happen. So they go out there. They didn't figure on Tony having a huge water hose that he used to douse any of the police ships that came close. He still had guests gambling and drinking on his ship. He wasn't holding them hostage exactly, but they were there for it. He finally let them go, but it was the law enforcement was just like, are you kidding me? And he's on his bullhorn, and he's acting like a captain of the ship. He's going down with the ship, he says, and he's not leaving, and it was just chaos. And so these police ships are circling Tony Carnero, and he's fire hosing them into oblivion, and he's just refusing. And they call this whole event the Battle of Santa Monica Bay. And Tony ultimately, and he's quite quotable. He thinks pretty quick on his feet. And finally, he decides, I think, to throw, to cash it in, to throw down the towel. But he says the only reason actually that he's going to get off the ship is because really he needs a shave and a haircut, and the only thing they don't have on the ship is a barbershop.
Classic. I think I remember that story too. Classic.
Classic. So he's just, he just was one of those flamboyant, kind of bigger than life gangsters in LA that we had a lot of, and I just love the Battle of Santa Monica Bay because he's a bad guy. He's not he did all kinds of awful stuff, but you end up rooting for him, because
don't forget deranged